Have you ever stayed somewhere that felt wrong the moment you stepped inside? Not because of anything obvious, but because something about the silence felt occupied, like the place had been waiting for you specifically, not just for a guest, but for you. And you couldn't explain why that thought even crossed your mind until it was already too late to ignore it. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap remote, and honestly, I just needed to get away for a few days without spending much. The kind of place you scroll past at first because it looks too isolated, too quiet. But then go back to when everything else is overpriced or fully booked. And this one had just enough decent reviews to convince me it was fine. Most of them were oddly short, like nice stay or peaceful location, nothing detailed, nothing personal, just vague enough to feel copied and pasted. But I didn't think much of it at the time because I wasn't looking for a story, just a place to sleep. The location was far, much farther than I expected, and the road leading to it slowly narrowed from a proper highway into a cracked, uneven stretch that looked like it hadn't been repaired in years, surrounded by tall, dry grass and clusters of trees that leaned inward slightly, like they were closing in over the road. And by the time the GPS said I was close, there were no other houses in sight. No lights, no movement, nothing that suggested anyone lived anywhere nearby. Just a single structure sitting in the distance like it had been placed there and then forgotten. The house itself didn't look abandoned, which somehow made it worse, because it was maintained just enough to feel intentional. The walls were clean, the windows intact, the front porch swept. But there was no sign of recent activity, no footprints, no parked vehicles, no sounds, just stillness that pressed in from all sides. And when I stepped out of the car, the quiet hit differently, like the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own movements, like you were the only thing disturbing something that preferred not to be disturbed. I remember hesitating before unlocking the door, not because I was scared exactly, but because something about the place made me feel like I was arriving at the wrong time. Like I had missed some kind of window where it would have been normal to show up, and now I was late, or early, or just not supposed to be there at all. But I brushed it off, telling myself I was overthinking, that this is what remote places feel like when you're not used to them. Inside, the air felt slightly colder than outside, not freezing, just enough to make it noticeable, like stepping into a room that hadn't been opened in a while. And the smell wasn't bad, just neutral, like nothing had been cooked there recently, nothing had lived there recently. And that thought lingered longer than it should have. Everything looked exactly like the listing photos, which should have been reassuring, but instead it felt staged, like nothing had changed since those photos were taken, like time had stopped inside the house. And even the small details, like a book on the table, a glass in the kitchen, a blanket folded on the couch, all looked placed rather than used, like they were meant to create the idea of a home rather than actually be one. I dropped my bag near the couch and checked my phone out of habit, seeing a new message from the host that I hadn't noticed while driving. And at first glance, it seemed normal, just a welcome message. But the longer I looked at it, the stranger it felt. Not because of what it said, but because of how it was written. Welcome. Please read the house rules carefully before settling in. They are for your safety. That last line felt unnecessary, like something you'd say as a joke, but there was nothing in the message that suggested humor. No emojis, no casual tone, just plain text. And attached below it was a document labeled simply, Rules. I almost didn't open it right away, thinking I'd just skim it later, but something about the message made it feel urgent, like ignoring it would be a mistake. So I tapped it open while standing there in the quiet living room, the screen lighting up the space just enough to make the shadows around me feel deeper. The rules weren't long, but they were specific in a way that normal house rules aren't, not about cleanliness or checkout times, but about things that didn't quite make sense unless you assumed something was wrong with the house itself. The first few seemed normal enough, almost comforting in their familiarity. 1. Lock all doors and windows before sunset. Do not unlock them again until morning. That felt excessive, but not alarming. Maybe just a safety precaution because of the remote location, animals, or something like that, so I kept reading. 2. If you hear knocking after sunset, do not open the door, even if it sounds like a person. I paused there longer than I should have, rereading it once, then again, trying to figure out why it was phrased that way, why, even if it sounds like a person, was necessary. Because what else would it sound like? And why would that distinction matter? I told myself it was probably just a weird way of saying, don't open the door at night. Maybe the host had a strange way of writing. Maybe English wasn't their first language. And I moved on. 3. If any door in the house unlocks by itself, do not check it, do not approach it, leave it as it is. That one didn't feel like bad wording anymore. It felt intentional, and I could feel a small, quiet discomfort settling in the back of my mind, the kind that doesn't spike into fear immediately, but sits there, waiting, growing slowly. 4. There's a room upstairs that will remain locked. Do not attempt to open it. If it is open when you arrive, leave the house immediately and contact the host. I glanced instinctively toward the staircase, even though I hadn't planned to go upstairs yet, and something about seeing it there, silent and dark, made the rule feel less hypothetical. 5. Keep the bedroom door closed while you sleep. If you wake up and find it open, do not get out of bed. That one didn't make sense in any normal context, not even as a safety rule, and I could feel the urge to laugh it off, to dismiss it as some kind of attempt at making the stay feel unique or themed. But the tone of the message didn't support that. It wasn't playful. It wasn't trying to entertain. Then I reached the last rule. 6. If the host messages you after midnight, do not reply. Do not open the message until morning. I stared at that one for longer than all the others combined, because it directly contradicted what I had just done. I had already opened a message from the host, and I checked the timestamp without thinking. 11:47 p.m. I hadn't noticed the time when I arrived, but it was already late, later than I planned, and the rule said after midnight, so technically I was still fine. But the closeness of it, the fact that I had arrived just before that cutoff, made it feel less like coincidence and more like timing I should have paid attention to. I locked the front door almost immediately after reading that, then went around checking the windows, even though I hadn't planned to before. And by the time I finished, the light outside had faded into that dim, uncertain stage where everything looks the same shade of gray. And I realized I had no idea what time sunset actually was out here. No nearby buildings, no street lights, nothing to measure it against. The house felt different after that, not physically, but in the way I noticed things. Every small sound, the faint creak of wood, the soft shift of air, things that would normally blend into the background now stood out, like they were trying to be heard. I told myself I was overreacting, that reading a list of strange rules in a quiet place would make anyone a little uneasy. And I tried to distract myself by unpacking, by moving around, by doing anything that made the space feel normal. But that feeling from earlier, the one I had at the door, the sense that I had arrived at the wrong time, hadn't gone away. It had just been waiting for me to notice it again. And as the last bit of daylight disappeared completely, I realized something I hadn't thought about before, something that made the rules feel less like suggestions and more like warnings. There was no signal out here, no calls, no data, nothing, except for messages from the host. It's strange how quickly a place can shift from unfamiliar to hostile without anything actually changing, like the walls stay where they are. The furniture doesn't move, the doors remain closed, and yet something invisible tilts just slightly out of place, enough for your instincts to notice before your mind can explain it. And that's exactly what happened not long after. I realized my phone had no signal for anything except the host's messages, because that detail didn't sit right, no matter how many ways I tried to rationalize it. I tried turning airplane mode on and off, restarting the phone, even walking around the house holding it up like that would somehow catch a signal from nowhere, but every attempt led to the same result. Empty bars, no connection, no access to anything outside. and yet the messaging app remained active, the conversation with the host sitting there like a single open line in an otherwise dead network. And I told myself maybe the app worked offline somehow, maybe it queued messages, maybe it was just a glitch, because the alternative, that the only way I could communicate was through whoever owned this place, was not something I wanted to entertain. The silence outside had deepened by then, not just quieter, but heavier, like the kind that absorbs sound rather than simply lacking it. And even inside, every movement I made seemed louder than it should have been. The soft drag of my bag on the floor, the click of a light switch, the faint rustle of fabric when I shifted, all of it echoing just enough to remind me how empty the house really was, or at least how empty it should have been. I checked the time again without thinking. 12:03 a.m. That's when I felt it, not fear exactly, but awareness, sharp and immediate, like stepping onto a surface you didn't realize was unstable until it moved under your weight. Because I had crossed into the time mentioned in the rules, the one that specifically warned about the host messaging after midnight. And for a moment, I just stood there, staring at the screen, half expecting something to happen simply because the time had changed. Nothing did, at least not right away. I locked the bedroom door before going inside, something I normally wouldn't bother doing, but the rules had planted that idea firmly enough that ignoring it felt like a risk I didn't need to take. And once I was in, I closed it carefully, making sure I heard the latch click into place, then checked it again just to be certain. Because there was a difference between knowing a door was closed and feeling like it would stay that way. The bedroom looked just like the rest of the house, neat, minimal, untouched, the bed perfectly made, the curtains drawn halfway, and a small lamp on the bedside table casting a warm, steady light that somehow made the corners of the room look darker by comparison, like the shadows had somewhere to hide instead of being spread evenly across everything. I placed my phone on the table and sat on the edge of the bed, telling myself I was just tired, that the drive, the isolation, the strange rules, all of it was combining into something that felt bigger than it actually was, and that once I slept, everything would feel normal in the morning, just another quiet stay in a remote place. That thought barely had time to settle before my phone buzzed. It wasn't loud, just a soft vibration against the wood, but in that silence, it might as well have been a knock. I didn't reach for it immediately. I didn't need to. I already knew who it was. When I finally looked, the screen lit up with a new message from the host, the same plain text, the same neutral tone, but this time the timing made it different, heavier, like the words carried more weight simply because of when they had been sent. 12:07 a.m. I didn't open it, not right away. The rule was clear, don't reply, don't even open it, and for a moment I considered ignoring that, telling myself it was ridiculous to let a list of strange instructions dictate what I could or couldn't do, but something about the consistency of everything so far, the isolation, the lack of signal, the way the house felt, made it harder to dismiss than it should have been. So I left it there, unopened, the notification sitting on the screen like something waiting. That's when I heard it, a soft, deliberate click from somewhere outside the room. It took a second for my mind to place it, to recognize the sound for what it was, because it wasn't loud or dramatic, just a small mechanical shift. But once I did, the meaning settled in immediately. A door. Unlocking. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe properly for a moment, just sat there, listening, trying to convince myself it could have been something else, the house settling, a pipe, anything that wasn't exactly what it sounded like. But the clarity of it made that impossible to believe. Another sound followed, slower this time, the faint creak of hinges moving, controlled, steady, like something was opening a door carefully rather than pushing it all at once. My eyes drifted toward the bedroom door without me telling them to, the one I had just locked, the one that still looked exactly the same, closed, unmoving. But that didn't help, because the rule hadn't said your door, it had said any door. 3. If any door in the house unlocks by itself, do not check it. Do not approach it. Leave it as it is. The words came back too clearly. like they had been waiting for this exact moment to matter. The instinct to get up, to look, to confirm what had just happened was immediate and strong, the kind that feels almost automatic, because not knowing is worse than knowing, even if what you find isn't good. But the rule sat there in my mind, heavy and specific, and for the first time, it didn't feel like something optional. It felt like a line, and something on the other side of it. The house went quiet again after that, completely still, as if whatever had moved had finished doing so and was now waiting, not for anything specific, just waiting in general. And that stillness was worse than the sound because it left too much space for possibilities. I glanced at my phone again. The message was still there, unread. Another vibration interrupted the silence, sharper this time because I was already on edge, and my eyes snapped back to the screen before I could stop myself. A second message, 12:12 a.m. I didn't open it either, but the preview showed just enough text to read the first line. Please don't ignore me. That was different. The first message, whatever it was, had been neutral, like before, but this one felt directed, aware, like whoever was on the other end knew I had seen the notification and chosen not to respond. I swallowed slowly, my mouth suddenly dry, and set the phone face down on the table, as if not seeing it would make it less real, less immediate. But that didn't stop the feeling that something had shifted again, something subtle but important. Then, from somewhere down the hallway, I heard it. Not a door this time. Footsteps, soft, measured, moving slowly across the floor. Not rushed, not random, but deliberate in a way that suggested intention rather than coincidence. And they weren't coming toward the room quickly. They were pacing, back and forth, like something was walking without a destination. I stayed exactly where I was, sitting on the bed, every muscle tense, listening as the steps continued, the rhythm steady enough to follow, but just irregular enough to feel wrong, like the timing wasn't quite human, like it paused in places where it shouldn't and continued in ways that didn't match a normal pattern. The handle of the bedroom door didn't move. Not yet, but the footsteps got closer. And then they stopped. Right outside. There was no knock, no attempt to open the door. Just stillness. The kind that feels like something is standing on the other side, not doing anything, not making a sound, but being there in a way that fills the space completely. My phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't want to look. But I did. 12:18 a.m. A third message, and even without opening it, the preview was enough. You shouldn't have locked that door. Part 3. There's a very specific kind of fear that doesn't explode all at once but tightens slowly, like something pulling a thread you didn't know was wrapped around you until every movement starts to feel restricted. And that's what it felt like sitting there on the edge of the bed, staring at a door I knew was locked, listening to something that had already proven it didn't need permission to move through the house. Because by that point, the rules weren't just words anymore. They were the only structure left between me and whatever was outside. The message stayed on my screen longer than I wanted to admit, the words repeating in my head in a way that didn't feel like reading, but like remembering something I hadn't learned yet. You shouldn't have locked that door. And the worst part wasn't the warning itself. It was how casually it was phrased, like I'd made a small mistake, something correctable, something that could still be fixed if I just did the right thing. I didn't move, not because I was brave, but because I didn't know which action counted as the wrong one anymore. Another sound broke the stillness, softer this time, closer, the faintest shift of pressure against the bedroom door. Not enough to rattle it, not enough to shake the handle, just a presence leaning against it from the other side, like someone resting their weight there, listening the same way I was. And the thought that whatever it was could be standing inches away from me, with only that thin barrier in between, made the air in the room feel heavier, harder to breathe. I pulled my legs onto the bed without thinking, instinctively creating distance from the door, even though I knew it wouldn't matter if the door didn't matter. And as I shifted, the mattress dipped slightly, the movement loud in the silence, and for a brief second, everything on the other side went completely still, like it had noticed. My phone buzzed again. 12:21 a.m. I didn't want to look, but not looking didn't stop it from being there, and somehow the not knowing felt worse than whatever it could say, so I turned it over slowly, the screen lighting up the room just enough to make the shadows feel deeper again. This time, the message was longer. You're making this difficult. The door needs to be open. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, not panic, not yet, but a clear, undeniable understanding that whatever was happening wasn't random, wasn't just noises in an old house or a series of coincidences, because the timing, the messages, the sounds, they were aligning too precisely, like two sides of the same conversation happening in different forms. The rules came back to me again, not all at once, but in fragments, the ones that had seemed strange before, now feeling deliberate. Keep the bedroom door closed while you sleep. If you wake up and find it open, do not get out of bed. I wasn't asleep, but the door was still closed, and something wanted it open. Another slow shift came from the other side, the same faint pressure against the wood, followed by a sound that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't control, because it wasn't a knock, it wasn't a scratch, it was breathing. Not loud, not exaggerated, just quiet, steady, close enough that I could hear the slight unevenness in it, like air moving through something that wasn't quite right, and for a moment I wondered how long it had been there, how long it had been standing on the other side of the door before I noticed. My hand moved toward the lock without me realizing it, not to open it, but to check it again, to feel something solid, something certain, and the small click of metal under my fingers grounded me just enough to stop the spiral of thoughts that was starting to build. The door was locked. It was still locked. That mattered. It had to. The phone buzzed again. 12:24 a.m. You're not supposed to stay in there. That line didn't feel like a suggestion. It felt like a correction. I shook my head slightly, more out of instinct than logic, as if physically rejecting the idea would make it less real, and forced myself to look away from the door, scanning the room instead, searching for something, anything that made sense, something I could control, but everything looked exactly the same as before, unchanged, undisturbed, which somehow made it worse because it meant the only thing that had changed was outside. Or maybe it hadn't. That thought came quietly, slipping in between the others before I could stop it, because the rules hadn't just been about outside the room, they had mentioned something else, something I hadn't fully processed at the time. Keep the bedroom door closed while you sleep. If you wake up and find it open, do not get out of bed. It didn't say anything about what might already be inside. The idea settled in slowly, and I felt my body go still in a completely different way. Not tense, not ready to react, but frozen, like moving would confirm something I wasn't prepared to face. The room hadn't changed, but I hadn't checked all of it, not properly. The space under the bed suddenly felt like more than just empty space. The closet door, slightly ajar, felt less like an oversight and more like something I had chosen not to notice. And even the corners of the room, the places where the light didn't quite reach, seemed deeper than they should have been, like they had more depth than the physical space allowed. My breathing slowed, not by choice, but because any sound I made felt like it would draw attention, and for a few seconds, everything stayed exactly the same. The presence at the door, the silence in the room, the weight of both pressing in from different sides. Then the pressure against the door disappeared, not gradually, all at once, like whatever had been there had stepped away without a sound. The sudden absence was worse than the presence, because it removed the only thing I could track, the only thing I could locate, and replaced it with uncertainty that spread through the entire house. I waited, 1 second, 2, 5, and nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement, just silence again. My phone buzzed one last time. 12:27 a.m. And this time, when I looked at the screen, the message didn't feel like it was coming from outside the room anymore. Thank you for opening it. My chest tightened so sharply it almost hurt because I hadn't moved. I hadn't touched the lock. I hadn't gone near the door. And yet as my eyes lifted from the screen, drawn by something I didn't want to acknowledge, they landed on the one thing I had been avoiding looking at directly: the bedroom door. Slightly open, not wide, not enough to see into the hallway clearly. Just enough for darkness to press through the gap. I don't remember unlocking it. I don't remember hearing it open. And the worst part wasn't that it was open. It was that I couldn't tell when it had stopped being closed. The rules didn't tell you what happens if you break them. They only tell you what not to do. And standing there, staring at that thin line of darkness, I understood why. Because some things don't need to force their way in. They just need you to stop noticing when they already have. If this felt real, that's because it was almost real. I'll see you in the next memory.